Let me welcome on stage Dr. Einat Wilf, former Member of Parliament, served in the Israeli Intelligence Unit 8200. That's a very premium organization of Israel, and is an author. There's a lot to talk about. We will continue in many ways than one. But what we are going to focus on is also the announcement that was made, Gaza or Riviera. Is it a solution or sacrilege? Dr. Wilf, let's just begin with the fact that Trump has come out and made this announcement for Gaza. President Trump is completely out supporting Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. In your view, given that Dr. Wilf is one of the liberal voices in Israel, what do you make of this plan of a Riviera in Gaza? Gaza is rich in resources. It's not just about the place, it's also about the resources that's, underneath. What do you make of this plan by Trump?
So first of all, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. What the American president did with his plan, and even before there's any discussion of implementation, he's already achieved several important things. First, he reminded people that Gaza, like you said, has no objective geographical problem. It's not some landlocked, windswept, drought-ridden place of misery. It sits on beautiful shores of the Mediterranean, great sand from the Egyptian delta, excellent soil, natural resources, the intersection of ancient trade routes. It has everything necessary to become a pearl of the Mediterranean, the Dubai of the Mediterranean. So what he's reminded people is that the problem is not objective. The problem is political. The problem is that the people of Gaza have made an ideological choice, and it's a choice to take their control of the territory of Gaza, and rather than put their considerable skills to making it into the Dubai of the Mediterranean, they have chosen to turn it into an integrated, weaponized landscape where every home, every school, every mosque is connected by tunnels. The amount of cement that went into the underground could have built the skyscrapers of Dubai. They have made the choice to turn Gaza into an integrated, weaponized landscape for the singular purpose which has led them for the last century, not to build for themselves, but to destroy what the Jewish people have built in their ancient homeland. So what the American president did, he said, look, if someone can figure out how to get rid of these politics of destruction, Gaza can be a remarkable place. So that's one thing that he's already achieved. The other thing that he introduced with the plan is the very quaint idea of consequences. And I heard that a bit in your questions before. For about a century, we're stuck in a loop that goes like this. Whenever the Arabs attack Israel, trying initially to prevent the establishment of a sovereign, independent Jewish state, and once it was established, trying to undo it, every time they attack and fail, they refuse to acknowledge defeat, and they demand a redo. No payment in land, no payment in displacement, no payment of reparation. From their perspective, this is what the Arab response to the Trump plan is. We demand to have no consequences. We carried out this invasion, this brutal attack, this massacre, and we expect to go back to the exact same point from which we carried out the attack, paying no consequences. So what the American president did is introduce the very quaint idea that if you attack and invade a country and carry out this massacre, there will be consequences.
You make a very good point. You talk about country, and that's why the conversation is about Israel is recognized, it is a state. Palestine isn't. Should they have a right to statehood? Should they be allowed their space? Because if there is a two-state solution, that could bring about maybe some semblance of peace and sanity?
So I grew up in the Israeli left with the sincere belief that the only thing separating us from peace, from quiet, is two states, the establishment of a Palestinian state. I supported every Israeli prime minister that pursued it, only to realize that when faced with the opportunity to establish a sovereign state of Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza, ending Israel's military presence, no settlements, capital in East Jerusalem, including holy sites, again and again and again, the Palestinians walk away from that and follow it up with violence, and there are no dissenting voices. So I began to ask what's going on, because you will not find in history a movement that claims to be a movement for liberation, self-determination, independence, that has a record of repeatedly walking away from opportunities to achieve that. So I began to ask what's going on, and I discovered that to the credit of Palestinians, and you heard it here too, they've always told us what they wanted. We just didn't listen. Or when we listened, it sounded so preposterous that we didn't take it seriously. But they always told us, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And in case you're wondering, free of what? Go to the Arabic, from water to water. Palestine will be Arab. You know, as I did the research that became the book, The War of Return, I came across a quote by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II. I understand he was no friend to India. He was certainly no friend to the Jewish people. He goes to the British Parliament in February 47 to explain why Britain failed. Contrary to what you heard here, Britain received a mandate unanimously from the League of Nations as a trust to help the Jewish people who were recognized as the historic claimants of the land of Israel to achieve sovereignty. Now, Britain did not betray the Arabs. It created Jordan, Iraq. France helped Syria and Lebanon become independent. But we arrive in February 47 and there's no Jewish state. So Britain failed, and he needs to explain why. And he says the following: His Majesty's government is faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Now, he calls it irreconcilable. In February of 47, there's no occupation, no settlements, no blockade of Gaza. No one is displaced. In case anyone tells you that the conflict is because Israel, Zionism displaced Arabs, in February 47, everyone is in place. And he already calls the conflict irreconcilable. And he goes on to explain. He says, in the land there are Jews and Arabs. No one clearly is called a Palestinian at this point. He says each one of those groups has a top priority. He says for the Jews, the top priority is to establish Jewish sovereignty in the land. So Jews want to exercise the universal principle of self-determination for the Jewish people, the Jewish nation in their ancient homeland. Great. And then he says, and for the Arabs, and these are not just any Arabs, these are the Arabs that will later hijack the name Palestine to be named Palestinians. He says, for those Arabs, the top priority, and listen to this, to resist to the last the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. He's not saying that this is a conflict between the Jews want a state, the Arabs want a state, and therefore the conflict can be solved through partition, through two states. He says as a matter of top priority, the Jews want a state, and the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. By definition, irreconcilable. And this has only ever been the conflict to the present. So Israel has always agreed to every two-state solution, provided that one of the two is the Jewish state. And the Arabs, and especially the Palestinians, have rejected every two-state solution if one of the two is the Jewish state. So I will just end with this. I support Palestinians having a state, but they actually finally need to want it. They've never wanted a state if it lives next to a Jewish state.
Well, that's a historical context and perspective, good for our audience. You live in Tel Aviv, so let's go back to what happened on October 7th, and I say that because the law changed since October 7th. You were there. It was a day like none other for Israelis. What was your experience?
So, not only was it a very dark day, of sheer brutality and glee. You know, I have a colleague who wrote a beautiful piece after October 7th called Ecstasy and Amnesia. And he says that the Arabs often go to war against Israel with tremendous ecstasy. And we saw the ecstasy on October 7th, the glee, they filmed it, the brutalizing of the Jewish bodies. But then, when they fail in their effort to bring an end to the Jewish state, amnesia sets in, and you saw it here. They become suddenly people who have no consequences, no agency. They don't understand why there's destruction in Gaza. How is that related to anything they did? So when you just described what I did as historical context, unfortunately, it's the present. Because what Palestinians did on October 7th, they did it in the name of their century-long ideology of no Jewish state. They were not breaking out of an open-air prison. As soon as the war began, we saw it was a lie. This lie was revealed. It was replaced by another lie. Just know that on the eve of October 7th, the Human Development Index of Gaza, not Gaza and the West Bank, Gaza, is better than 90 countries in the world. So it's not a story of misery. We know that October 7th required massive investment and planning and strategy and discipline and vision, a perverted vision, but vision. These are not an incapable people. And the euphoria that you saw on October 7th and which we experienced is because the Palestinians finally realized the vision for which they were groomed for decades of what they call return. And if anyone ever imagined that return is some soft nostalgia to a great-grandparent's lost home, in the Palestinian vision, return is October 7th. So for me personally, not only was it a horrific day, it was also a day for which I've been writing for 20 years. You mentioned that I was in the Israeli intelligence, but when I left my intelligence service in the early 90s, I said we can actually close down most of our intelligence services and do something very simple. Listen to the Arabs. They're telling us what their intentions are, what they plan to do. Sinwar said for years and months and weeks, the day of return is coming. And this is why you saw so much euphoria on October 7th, because October 7th, that brutality was the realization of the Palestinian vision of return. And we made the mistake, I've invented a word for it, West-planing. It's when Western diplomats and journalists, hopefully here you don't do it.
That's a term.
Western diplomats and journalists explain away what Palestinians just say. Palestinians will say, we're going to kill you, the day of return is coming, there will be no Jewish state. And Westerners will say, they want a two-state solution. So if we listen to them and we take them seriously and we stop explaining away, we understand that October 7th was carried out in the name of a horrific, destructive ideology.
Dr. Wilf,
yes.
Not all Palestinians think the same way. Now, you do mention Palestinianism and so on and so forth, but not all Palestinians think that there shouldn't be the existence of an Israeli state. I'm just asking you this because you spoke about development. Can development ever replace freedom? Because Gazans were not allowed to move freely. They had development, but there were gates, and the gatekeepers were Israelis. West Bank, people are not allowed to move freely. There are checkpoints between area A, area B, area C, as has been defined. The areas have different categories. So they are not a free people.
So, first of all, in Gaza, I like to call the border that Gaza has...
Can I just add?
Oh, sure.
Even when they were bombed, or they were being bombed, they weren't allowed to leave Gaza. They could go, they were told, move from north to south, and then we are bombing south, so move from south to north. But they couldn't leave Gaza.
So first of all, you're right that this is one of the most bizarre elements of this conflict and only exists in the Israeli context. I love to call the border that Gaza has with Egypt. I was in government when Ariel Sharon decided to get out of all of Gaza, including the border with Egypt. And I've come to call this the disappearing border with Egypt. Everyone seems to ignore it. Gazans were going out to Egypt, through Egypt, and the notion, after they carried out October 7th, that civilians are not allowed to escape war is an exception that has been made only in the case of Israel in order to basically say Israel will have to fight under conditions that no other country has ever been demanded to fight. But in the West Bank, for example, you mentioned the checkpoints. One of the most bizarrely weird ways in which the conflict is told is reversal of cause and effect. Why are there checkpoints in the West Bank? Because after the Palestinians could have had in 2000 a sovereign state in the West Bank and Gaza, fully free, no Israeli military presence, no settlements, capital in East Jerusalem, including holy sites, what do? It was a check, check, check proposals. They could have said yes, but no. They walked away and followed it up with a 3-year campaign of bloody massacres of people coming from the West Bank and Gaza to blow up our buses, our cafes. Before October 7th, it was the darkest time to live in Israel. There was a literal, palpable sense that you were playing Russian roulette with your life by boarding a bus. So yes, the checkpoints became necessary to prevent those attackers from entering our cities. Again, cause and effect. But if you listen to Palestinian speakers, they'll be, oh, there are checkpoints. But why? So the notion of bringing cause and effect in a proper order is actually necessary. So the only reason we are where we are has been that for the last century, the Arabs of the land, the Palestinians, have prioritized destroying the Jewish state rather than building for themselves. Now, you asked if there are exceptions. Over the years, I agree with you. What I said sounds harsh, sounds excessive. I'm generalizing, and I've been saying this for years. And people will tell me, Einat, you're exaggerating, this can't be. They have their extremists, you have your extremists on both sides. I was like, no. First of all, remember the context of the numbers. The Arab Middle East is the size of India, I think, twice. Israel is the size, I think you say, of Kerala, half. We are always willing to compromise, not because we're nice. I think we're nice, but that's not the reason. We're ready to compromise because we're small. So, and the Palestinians refuse to compromise because they know they have the backing of the Arab world and the Muslim world, and increasingly some people in the West who keep telling them, keep fighting. So I've been on a journey for 20 years to find Palestinians, like you said, who do not subscribe to this ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism, which has 4 core tenets. From the river to the sea, there will be no Jewish state, and we are therefore perpetual refugees until return. And return is October 7th. In a career of 20 years of seeking them out, meeting, asking, I have found four individuals. And if you don't believe me, over the years, people who didn't believe me, I told them, look, this is not a view. This is not an opinion. Even here, you heard Hamas is a political party. It's Palestinian. This is not a view. If you don't believe me, go find Palestinians who say it publicly. In the Arab world, if you don't say things publicly, it's worthless. That they recognize the equal right of the Jewish people, not religion, the Jewish people, civilization, to self-determination in their ancient homeland. They want to live next to the Jewish state, not from the river to the sea. And the two key litmus tests, they're not refugees, and there's no right of return. And I realized that if you ask these last two, you then realize that you only have 4 Palestinians who reject the ideology of Palestinianism. And I'll just end with this. If we are to have peace, and I call myself a long-term peace activist, the ideology of Palestinianism, the ideology that is singularly obsessed with the destruction of the Jewish state, that ideology has to die so that both people must finally live.
Dr. Einat Wilf, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.